4, facilitate. The third thing that we actually do, or not the third month you might say, begin and end on time every time. I think that's so important. If people get used to starting 15 minutes late, I know of people that the other church I was at where there was a group that started about 20 minutes late. The leader would get there 20 minutes late. It was on Sunday afternoon. Well, then you get there on time, and then they got there 20 minutes late, so they didn't 20 minutes late, but this person had other things they had to do, and it just works well if you do that. And also another thing, too, on that is they also claim that it works best if you don't rotate your location during the semester. If you have a thing where you're doing hiking and things like that, by all means do it. It's okay. And you could even like say, hey, I'm going to use my Facebook page, get on that, and I'm going to say this or that where we are. But what happens is if someone loses out on one of them, then they've lost track on where you're meeting. It's also why emails and things like that are important. Okay. But generally, it's probably good to just stay at the same place for the semester, unless you have something like what John's doing or we're going to be meeting at different places. And encourage everyone to participate in discussion. There's an illustration at the bottom of page 7, and it shows the leader just doing all the talking to the members on the left. And then the illustration on the right shows how to keep it in play. And I didn't bring one today, but when I taught my kids how to communicate, we literally sat in the room and I got a rubber ball. And I would say, hey, Ben, how you doing? And I would pass him the ball. And he would catch it. And he'd throw it back and he'd say, okay, Dad. And I'd say, what's been going on at school? And I'd throw him the ball. And he'd come back and say, well, today we learned about this and this and this. And I'd say, really? What did you learn about this? What does this mean to you? And then he'd talk to me. And so the ball would go back and forth. And for me, the way that I think, that's a good way to communicate. Have you ever had someone where you throw the ball and nothing happens, and you throw another ball and nothing happens, you throw another one? Okay, well, you're going to identify people like that in your group. So if one person does 80 or 90% of the talking, which is not uncommon, then it's kind of neat to look at somebody and say, hey, Kim, what do you think? Or better yet, another way to say it is, hey, there's some of you here that haven't said much. What do you think about this? And what you're doing is telling the guy that talks all the time to not talk in a way that he doesn't get upset. Okay? Because if one person talks all the time, now you're probably getting tired of it, and everybody else is probably getting tired of it too. I mean, everybody needs to communicate. There are people who will sit there week after week after week after week and not say anything if you don't try and draw something out of them. Okay? And I mean, keep in mind, be sensitive to people, because some people just don't like to talk in public. And it's like we did this crowd breaker today where I ask you those things. I have a good friend, Kevin. He's got a job. He makes over $100,000 a year. But if he sits in a group with leaders like this and they ask that question, by the time it gets around to him, he's got sweat dripping off his face. He cannot stand things like that. Okay? So you got to be sensitive to people. Some people are kind of quiet, but you really got to draw out of them what you can. My wife Kim is a good example. She's real quiet, but when she talks, it's so good I want to take notes. Okay? So when she speaks up and has an opinion, I really want to listen, because she doesn't do it very often. Okay? Any questions or comments at this point? Anything you've experienced or anything that I've said ring a bell or anything like that?
Just to, when you talk about the public speaking, some people, think public speaking is what Ray does on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And the person sitting right next to him think, well, that's sitting in a group of 6 or 8 people. That's public speaking.
That's good.
And you just gotta be able to figure out what that term means to each person.
That's good.
In that group.
On the video, I don't know if I'm going to repeat what people say. I think you might have heard that, but Jim had said that public speaking, some people might think it's the pastor up in front, but for the person in a group of 6 or 8, if they speak out to them, that's public speaking. And also, to go along with that is public prayer. Scares some people to death.
Yes.
If you can work on that and teach people how to pray publicly without pressuring them, it's good. I had a group one time that I met with, and it's a group that's a discipleship group intended for one leader and two students. And I had these 2 students, and both of them were afraid to pray in public. Even with just the 3 of us, they were afraid. So what they tell you to do is, when you pray, say, okay, let's each of us pray. And say, I know you don't want, I know it's uncomfortable for you to pray, but there's only 3 of us here. Nobody here but us and God. Just say something simple, so I'm going to pray. And you start out as a leader and say, God, thank you for the weather. And they are going to sit there and go, I could do better than that. Okay? So you don't start out by saying, thou God, thou knoweth, God's not impressed with that anyway, we know that. But start out by saying something like that. God, thank you for the weather. Or God, thank you for my family, or God, thank you for whatever. And make it so simple that they can join in. James Dobson once told the story that he was with a group of men in a real small group. There's 3 or 4 of them. They were very, very mature Christian men. And there was a young man, maybe his name was Bob, and he came to know the Lord that week. And Bob came with one of the guys. So there's 4 very seasoned Christians, and here's Bob. And they were going to pray out loud. And each of them offered up a huge, eloquent prayer. And at the end, it got quiet. And finally, Bob said, God, this is Bob. I don't know if you remember me, but I met you this week through Jesus. And then Bob went on. And James Dobson said he put us all to shame with his prayer. Because it was so real. I'm tingling right now. You are too. Because it was so real and so direct to God. And the eloquent people didn't have the prayer that maybe honored God, but the man who was a new convert was praying from his heart. Go back to my story. Those 2 guys that I was teaching didn't want to pray. I walked them through the process like that. And it was a year or 2 later, I went away to college, and a year or 2 later I went back, and they were dedicating a new wing, youth wing at the church. And one of the guys by then was an elder, and another guy, they were both happened to be there. And they had a time when they said, anyone here that wants to pray, just pray. And I stood there in the back, and I didn't pray. But both of those 2 guys prayed in public. Yeah, it was just so cool. So if you can bring people out and help them to do that, then that's good too. And we are at the top of page 8. Is that right?
Yep.
So don't let one person ruin it for everyone else. We've talked about that, the person who talks all the time. Ask open-ended questions, not yes or no, but ask questions that lead out. Yes, John?
What do you do when you get someone that, like, kind of an overpowering personality that likes to talk? When you ask a question, they kind of start talking on it, and then they start steering away. How do you politely say, let's stay on topic?
John's question is, what if you have a person who, when you ask something, they grab a hold of the question, then they go off and get off onto something else, and they continually do that. I want to do another training in the future that talks about the different temperaments and different personalities, and we need all those. Like, for instance, there's the peacemaker, there's the one who's the instigator. He wants to cause trouble at everything, and that's okay. We need him, or else we'd all stay on task all the time and wouldn't maybe find an alternate way that we need to go. So we need everybody, but one of your things for you to do is to learn how to work with all those personalities. So for the person who says, you say something, you're going down a path, and this guy goes, or lady goes and takes off in another direction. I want to ask you, what do you do? I have something in mind, but for those of you that are seasoned leaders, what would you do? Tom?
One thing I would do would be to form like a team effort.
Okay.
I would talk to the individual maybe later and say, hey, can you help me, bring these other guys up, and here's what I need you to do. And basically, they're telling drop it down, but and so it gives him something to do. So he's on a mission, not his own mission, but he's on a team mission. Maybe that would do it.
That would be my answer. Tom said that he would make a team, create a team with this person, take them aside, put your arm around them, and I would use it in 2 different ways. One is if they get off task, and try and use that to say, hey, when we do this, we're trying to do this and go this direction. I need you to help me to kind of this. And he, oh, okay. And if he becomes a team leader, that's good. The other thing is, if he talks too much or she talks too much all the time, is do the same thing. Form that friendship where you go up and you're a team and you say, hey, look, I've noticed Kim and Aaron aren't really talking much. So let's work together and let's see what we can do to try and pull a little bit more out of them. Okay. And what you're saying in reality is you're talking too much, but there's a tactful way to say that, and it's not deceitful to do that, to tell somebody that. I mean, the way I said it, you're talking too much is not right, okay? Don't go up and say, hey, Bob, you're talking too much, this isn't working. But you can go up and say, hey, Bob, tell you what, really appreciate, I can see you got leadership qualities, and I can see your potential in this and this and this. However, I tell you what, these Aaron and Kim, they're not coming out of their shell. And so let's gently try and urge them and see if we can just do things to bring them out of the shell. What do you think? You want to work with me on this? And he's going to say, sure. And now you got an ally to help you, and you haven't alienated somebody. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Anybody else have anything different?
I was just going to say, in the group, if you get someone that starts on subject, but by the time they're done, they're off subject.
Yeah.
I've just usually said, all that's really, really interesting, but we really need to get back to whatever it is we're talking about, and that just brings the group right back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you're back on track.
We were just recently in a group like that, and the guy went clear off on a road, and by the time he got done, his wife goes, "Where in the world are you at? That doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about." It was kind of funny because the guy is funny anyway, and he looked at her and goes, "Well," he's the kind of guy that took it real well. But she was probably the person that could say it. But I was sitting there thinking, not sure where this is going, because. And there's times I do that. Every once in a while when I preach, I'll look at Kim in front of the whole congregation. I'll look at Kim and go, "Where was I?" Because you go down this ADD rabbit trail, and you don't know your way back. It happens to us. That's good. That was good. Okay. On to page 9. This is a checklist. We just got done with the 4 F's, and it's the fill up, follow up, focus, and facilitate. All this page is a checklist, so you can go down and check and see if you did those things. Do you understand me? What we just covered, this is a quick little checklist. I don't even need to go over it because we already covered it. It just makes your life easy, okay? I'm not here to complicate things.